Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm delighted today to get a little more time with someone who was just briefly on the podcast with me last year. I'm joined today by Dana Bryson, who is Senior Vice President of Social Impact at studycom. Dana, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Really nice to be here again. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and you're in an interesting space, social impact at study.com. We talked last year when you were partnering with ETS to help folks with the Praxis exam, and that's when I made my Allen Iverson Praxis. You talked to me about Praxis. I'm going to do it every time. I can't resist.
You can't help yourself.
Yeah. But then study.com does interesting surveys of educators, and I think we're going to want to get a little more into one you did recently based on the results of the NAEP.
Right.
We'll get into that in a bit, but I don't think we had time to really get to know you and your origin story, how you got to this point in your career. Can you catch us up on that, and then we'll get into some of those other things?
Absolutely, Mike. I think where to start. I mean, I guess I would say I'm a product of the public school system, proud graduate of Denver Public Schools, raised in the city by divorced parents, activist parents. My parents had the first legal interracial marriage in Virginia after Loving versus Virginia. And so that's been a huge part of who I am, sort of this person who grew up at the intersection. If it's a Venn diagram that's overlapping, it's probably got something to do with my life in a lot of different ways. And so it was, but really with the foundation around social justice and activism. And it's with that background that I went to graduate school to study public policy, to really understand, what are they teaching the boys, really? How are we setting up the system? I was at Harvard Kennedy School. How are they setting up the system so that I can deconstruct and we can reconstruct it with some sort of collective action? So that was really my motivation behind going back to school.
And that's kind of like the big leagues for policy, right? Harvard Kennedy School, like you're not slumming when you're at the Kennedy School.
There were, I'd say, probably the two great things I got out of the experience there. The first were just the relationships that I have had for the last 20-something years since I graduated, with folks all over the world doing very interesting things.
Social capital in action.
It's the real thing. And the second is just this sense of, like, I don't know, a bullshit sniffer in terms of knowing a little bit about a lot to be able to be at the table and understand, I don't know that I have the answer, but I certainly know which questions to ask. And that has been really helpful for me as I've worked across with my fourth tech company that I've been working in, but I've spent, 25 years and still chair the board of two nonprofits, one international, one largest environmental organization in the state.
Right.
And it's really, I like to work in the areas that are gray. And so for me, social impact, specifically working for a tech company that's got at its heart a product that helps deliver educational outcomes and can really be targeted to folks who need it the most. It was really interesting for me to be able to do it. So I spent about a decade as a mayor's chief of staff. So I was chief of staff for Jerry Brown when he was mayor of Oakland. We might have talked about that. And worked
that's good. Even in a 10-minute interview, you might want to drop that little morsel. Yeah.
And if we have time, or maybe when the mic is off, I can give you some yoga stories with Mayor Brown and his dog Dharma.
Wow.
True story.
Because also a fun fact about Dana, your dog's name is Ravioli, which
this is true.
Our listeners may not have known that until now. Yeah.
Right. And now you're kind of hungry. She's real cute. She's a rescue dog. So anyway, that's kind of it, Mike. I feel like I have always understood or experienced what it means to be an other or feel like an other, trying to be put in a box.
Yep.
And so I wanted to, with a background in activism, understand policy so that I could really work at the intersections. And I love social impact work because to me, it's the way to take market forces in business, which move quickly and need to be responsive, to take policy applications and principles, and to take activist beliefs and values and kind of put them together at work. And that's what we've been able to do in this role I've been in now 5 years at Study and enjoying it.
Study is an education company, an ed tech company. Can you talk about what Study is and then how social impact works there?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I was so interested in study is because of our founder and CEO, Adrian Ridner, who founded the company, the very first iteration when he was in college. But really, it's been in this form for almost 15 years in terms of a full academic curriculum, K through 12.
Also, Adrian is a Trending in Ed alum. He has been on the
Yes,
podcast back
yes,
in the
he
day.
has.
So shout out to that. We'll include a link to that episode in the show notes as well.
I encourage folks to listen in on that because his story, when I talk about a really powerful origin story, I mean, he grew up in Latin America. He's Argentine, but he moved to 3 different countries before he came to the US, to California in college. He did not speak the language when he got to high school. And he didn't see teachers that looked like him. And part of the formation of study was kind of looking at the high cost of textbooks and how do you bring
Right.
this academic curriculum, high quality to folks to meet them where they're at so that education is more of a bridge than a door slammed in your face. So that's kind
Right.
of been what we've been focused on. So
Yeah. And that even ties to when we talked last year around that Praxis
yes,
deal. There was a social impact. How do we help more folks who may not be able to afford to prepare for the teacher certification? How do we get more people across that hurdle? How do we get more folks who maybe otherwise would have had barriers to enter the teaching workforce? That's an example of the types of projects that you're kicking off at study.com.
exactly. So for study, I'll just say it's a full academic curriculum, K through 12. We've got learners and educators in over 10,000 school districts. But we also have over 250 college level courses that transfer to more than 1,000 universities. So I'll talk about this initiative in a minute. Our initiative we'll be announcing, but I can give you a preview, is around college access and affordable college access to offer more pathways for working adults, specifically who want to complete their degree, but also who want to be an educator.
Right.
And then we've got test prep for, over 1,000 different tests, but we do a lot around teacher test prep, real estate, nursing, military, etc.
Yeah. And that's why you're close to educators as an audience. Many of them are users or advocates for study.com in their schools, in their school districts. That's why you're periodically polling them, surveying them to try to get a read on, their voice. Because I think teacher voice is a trend that we've tracked. Some student voice is the one that you hear more about, but I think there is a related trend. Many folks do talk about trying to understand what's it like to be a teacher. There's a lot of awareness of, burnout and relatively short tenures, low pay, and a lot of hard, emotional work where sometimes they don't feel like they have that support. So it's great to hear that you're listening to them and surveying them.
Yeah.
And in addition to making college more accessible, another issue is K-12 even delivering on its promise to keep our students educated and, at thresholds we want them to hit on tests like the NAEP, and then the NAEP scores come out, the PISA scores come out, and folks, run the same fire drills to say these scores are bad. They are, but it's great that you're doing research now into how are teachers feeling about this stuff. Can you catch us up a little more on how that whole thing came together?
Absolutely. I mean, Mike, we operate on the principle, and I think about my background in activism and collective action. If it's about us, it's not without us, right? So that's the idea behind study.com and our passion around making sure we're connected to educators to understand the perspectives and experiences that they bring that aren't always at the forefront when we look at policy, et cetera. So yeah, when we we anticipated, as we all did, that NAEP scores were going to come out. And in this year of dark clouds, in my opinion, we were not expecting that this was going to be a bright light. But we did think, okay, these scores are going to come out. We are holding our breath, but have a sense of what they might say. Let's go early and get some teacher perspectives on why they say what they say and what it means. And so that's what we did. We did a survey of 700 elementary and middle school teachers to get insights on the factors that they thought were contributing to learning gaps, because we know.
And we'll share this in the show notes. So for those of you who have the ability to browse along with us, we'll share a link to the results of this survey.
That's great. Big surprise. I think anyone who's probably listening in knows what the NAEP scores show, but the gap, mind the gap. The gap is just getting larger.
And which gap specifically, just in
The
case?
gap between those with the highest scores and those with the lowest scores. And if you look at aggregate scores, there's a worse story than what the aggregate tells, because when you disaggregate the numbers, you can see that the highest performers are going up, which is skewing everything up.
Yeah.
But the lowest performers are going down, and they overrepresent in certain.
Ex-Kaplan guy would call that a bimodal distribution.
It's a bimodal distribution.
For those of you who like that stuff. At least multimodal, you know, but it's not a traditional bell curve, like either side are bubbling up, which is creating that gap. It's just funny that I did need to ask which gap, because like there's so many gaps nowadays.
Which gap is exactly right. It is exactly right. And so we really wanted to understand from teachers, okay, we might know what this is going to say. How do we effectively address what we're going to see?
Right.
Because you all are in the classrooms every day. So we did this national survey. And the two big things that came out were really around strong family engagement and stronger family support for learning outcomes. And in some ways, it's not a surprise, but it really 87% of the teachers believe that increased support of parents and families would be the single biggest thing to helping close this gap.
Yeah.
You know, about half of them said, okay, family prioritization of academics is the primary cause of learning gaps. And I see those as two sides of the same coin, so that we were trying to understand what's an actionable thing that could happen to support families in this way. Because what we saw is in terms of the lowest band of folks and those performers, that 2/3 of the lowest performing groups come from historically disadvantaged populations, 40% Hispanic in terms of the lowest performing groups, and 25% English language learners. And we know that there is obviously an overlap there. There's some overlap there. So really, according to what we heard from teachers, I interpret, how do we better support those 40% of Hispanic, Latino, or English language learners in the bottom rung of, you know, whose scores are going down?
Right.
How do we support those families and parents?
Yeah. Which is important. It's the whole child idea too, is that rather than what we do in the classroom, a lot of it is more what do we do outside of the classroom, whether it's through engaging with the community or engaging directly with families, which is an important note, because I know we're going to talk about AI. It's 2025. That's coming next. But it's important to note that the first thing that was raised is more just around sort of basic levels of support and engagement that kind of allow you to customize and understand better the learners who are coming into your classroom.
Right.
I remember I was down at South by Southwest EDU recently, and I was talking to someone who works in the field, and she was talking about how important it was to just text through like the mobile apps that we get, just like text to teachers to say your daughter had trouble sleeping last night, or, you know, just give them a little more direct, break down that barrier, I guess, to directly engage with your teachers, just so that they understand your kid is a human who's dealing with all sorts of challenges. It's easy to kind of lose sight of the fact that frequently that's coming out of a place of privilege. If you're able to kind of like use the app, you have enough time, and you're kind of thinking, oh, let me just send my teachers a text. But it's also an awareness thing too. It's like a parent education thing to kind of let them know to be engaged. First off, we want your feedback. And secondly, here's some easy ways to do it. And then to your point, if there are English as, you know, a second language components to the engagement, how do you develop tools? This kind of gets back into where study kind of operates, but how do you develop tools that actually allow for non-native English speakers and learners? Like, how do you build those types of tools to help with parental engagement?
Right. And how do you even get the knowledge to understand what the baseline is in your school or in your district? Because in many of these districts, we're seeing that sometimes the parents don't speak any English, and the student is the only person or a sibling in the family that needs to receive a message or translate it. And just to your point about texting, I think there is this sense of, I don't want to bother the teacher, they're so busy. But in fact, I agree. And, you know, I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader in Denver Public Schools here, and they communicate via text. And that is the most effective way, I think, for many of our families. But I think a lot of school districts still communicate via email, where there are majority
Yeah.
of families who are not opening email during the day or in
Right.
a 48-hour period.
Hmm.
We know about the digital divide, and they may not have access to technology at home, but
Right.
everyone's got a phone.
Mhm.
Almost everyone's got a phone. And so
Right.
that texting is a trend that we're seeing be more
Hmm.
effective in terms of 95% of folks will open a text within 5 minutes.
Right. We'll include information about this. It's really relevant to, I think, anybody who's listening nowadays who's trying to understand what's happening in the education space. And then the other piece to the puzzle here is AI. And there's some notes here about AI's double-edged sword in the classroom. 64% of teachers worry AI misuse is widening achievement gaps, even as 54% see its potential for personalized learning. That to me sounds pretty consistent with some of the conversations I've been having, and it actually almost like reinforces your point about those two modes moving further apart.
Right.
Is AI really going to enable the high performers and the folks who already are kind of flourishing? And will there be trust and access gaps around AI that'll make it harder to reach the lower end of the curve here? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there will be gaps, and there already are. I mean, I'm a visual thinker. So when I think about AI, I picture a tsunami.
Mm,
And I picture right now the tsunami, it's moving under, the water's moving, but we can't necessarily see it. We hear it's coming, we know it's coming. Yes, there are lots of examples around what's happening, but that's really the wave of change
mhm.
hasn't come yet, but
Right.
it's coming. And I think we do our students really a disservice, especially our socioeconomically disadvantaged students, to give any message other than work hard to understand it and have our institutions support and double down on the knowledge, the elimination of kind of disinformation about it being a big, bad, scary thing, and
Yeah.
rolling up sleeves and getting all of our students involved in using machine learning and artificial intelligence. They already are, they might not know it,
Right.
but I think these early lessons we heard about cheating and ChatGPT
Right.
they were harmful, even though they might have been factual,
Yeah.
but that was sort of cutting off at the knees, I think, for a lot of families. I mean, my daughter, who's in 7th grade, said, I need to tell you, I use ChatGPT for something. I said, good for you. Can
Right.
you teach me how to use?
Yeah.
No, not really, but I think that sense of, and so I look at organizations like Latinos for Education and the Center for Black Educator Development, who are doing AI education in
Hmm.
conjunction with ISTE to make sure that we first understand the baseline. What do students know and need to know? And then really work to help support and double down on the education support around what it means and having hands-on opportunities.
Yeah. One of the panelists on my session at South by Southwest EDU, Mike Yates, after our session, I think coined, although I kind of want to take credit because it was right after my session, but he was talking about AI dexterity, which
Mhm.
is beyond literacy. It's like, how can you actually use these tools for yourself, your family, your community?
Yeah.
And I think that was a breakthrough idea for me, where it's not just literacy for the sake of literacy, it's literacy in service of kind of your own future empowerment, current empowerment, where if you learn how to use these tools, you become more of a player
Yeah.
in the world we live in
Yeah,
nowadays.
it's coming and it's
Yeah.
here and it's going to stay. Our CEO, Adrian Ridner, said to us about, I don't know, maybe a year ago,
Yeah.
sort of like an emergency company meeting to say, I hear that some folks may not be using AI in their daily jobs. And I'm not
Mm,
talking about the developers and the engineers and the product people. It's
right.
built into our product. I can talk about that. But it was more that no matter what your job is, if you're not using these tools, you're wasting your own time and doing things that can be started
Right.
some other way, whether
Right.
it's a spreadsheet or looking at code or writing a press release. So
Yeah.
it's an edict, and I actually really appreciate it because it's pushed me into a discomfort zone that is really now saving me a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think of it as you have to engage, but best case, you can engage critically. So
Mhm.
that's where, like, rather than just accept what's there, because lots of times there are profit motives, there are
Oh, yeah.
data privacy concerns, there are things that, as a parent of a 6-year-old, that, like, there are ways in which you can talk to a 6-year-old about data privacy and about, like, what advertisers might be trying to do, depending on the
Mhm.
6-year-old. The other topic that we wanted to hit on is diversity among the teachers themselves around the
Yeah.
teaching workforce, which was the other item that's really highlighted here. There is an element to like understanding who his teacher is and being able to identify with his teacher, that, you know, even male teachers have been another element in his upbringing. This where there's like real men teach is something that
Yes.
I think Curtis Valentine is
Yes.
the guy behind that. But can you talk a little bit about what got you, you know, the data here, I guess, that's moving you in this direction, and then some of the ways in which you think we might be able to address some of the, again, this is another place where there are gaps.
I can talk a lot about it, so you'll have to get the hook when you're ready to move on to the next topic. But this sort of speaks to my background in policy and our values as a mission-driven organization. There's some research that came out of Harvard. There's something that I had a lived experience around in being a mixed-race woman in public schools and saw in my peers and friends. But it's also research that came out of Harvard School of Education a couple years ago. I attended a talk and I'm showing a book. I don't know if folks can see it, but it's called Teacher Diversity and Student Success. Racial Representation Matters in the Classroom. And it shows empirically in a lot of different contexts that if students have at least one same race ethnicity educator in their primary school, generally, that they will do better, they will be more successful in terms of things that we might care about, like standardized test scores and graduation rates, and things that I know we care about, like self-esteem and having an educator having a high standard for a student. And so it was that data that really underpinned the formation of one of our impact initiatives that we talked about at GSV last year called Keys to the Classroom, which is the national initiative of studycom to have a more representative and diverse educator pipeline. And so it was through that program just quickly that we donated over 10,000 teacher test prep licenses. Your listeners probably know, but you can go to school, get a bachelor's in education, do really well, and you got to take the certification exam. And in 42 states, it's the praxis, and the other states, it's state specific. And it's usually Pearson or ETS that are creating and administering them in conjunction with the states. And it's a huge barrier. That last mile is a huge barrier to getting in the classroom. And 50% of the people on the test, this is from the NCTQ, National Center for Teacher Quality Data, fail the first time and 25% never pass. And this is much worse for teacher cadets of color. And so we said, well, we can do something about that at Study. We have these values. We know we have excellent educator prep materials. And so we are going to create this initiative to work with alternative pathway programs. So that can mean a standard EPP educator prep program, but it can also mean a teacher residency program, an apprenticeship program, a grow your own program where we're working with paraprofessionals who want to be teachers and have that experience in the classroom.
Right.
And so we're now in over 30 states, and that led to the partnership with ETS last year, where we built a free Praxis Core. Praxis Core is the test that you need to pass if you want to get into an educator prep program, to say this shouldn't be a barrier for folks who want to become an educator. We'll create a free diagnostic. It's got AI built into it, and it really helps. So we did that with ETS, but we're also official research partner at ETS on Praxis. And we've had a wonderful year collaborating with them to follow a couple cohorts of students. Teach.org is one of our partners. And so we're in a tripartite agreement with Teach.org, really looking at over about a year, 12 to 18 months in North and South Carolina. What happens when aspiring educators, get materials to be able to prepare for a test? And what we saw is that they're 27% higher to pass.
Prep matters, Dana. Ex-Kaplan guy, prep matters.
Prep matters. And also the way that we're using AI, and that we've really, in partnership with ETS, seen it have some great results, is that we found that people generally study what they know because you feel good about it. And you sort of just push that stuff you don't know so well to the side, and you'll come back to it later. Well, we have these diagnostics that make sure you work. If you've got 2 hours to prep this week, we're going to take you through an AI diagnostic and then make sure that you are studying the things that you most need to know to be able to pass the test.
I was really struck, just real quick on that too, that ETS, and it was Paul Golish, is his name? Yeah, because Paul was genuinely advocating for people to pass the praxis. And that was eye-opening for me, where like even ETS and someone who's supposed to be administering the test, they want people to clear that hurdle.
Well, they do.
Yeah. And that to me was sort of the aha from our brief engagement at happy hour in San Diego last year. So we'll include a link to that episode too. And it's great to hear that it's still moving the needle and you're still tracking this here. I'm talking to Dana Bryson, who's the SVP of Social Impact at studycom. We'll include links to what we're talking about in the show notes for the episode. As we wrap up here, Dana, we covered a lot of ground, whether it was talking about the results from educators based on the NAEP, how folks feel about AI, how we kind of overcome some of those barriers, and then how do we diversify the teacher pipeline. As folks head back to the rest of their lives, any concluding thoughts, final words of wisdom, takeaways from you as we wrap up?
Well, what I would say, Mike, is that the next issue we're tackling is the high cost of college, and to really look at how you take the 40 million with some credit and no degree and make sure that they can, while they're working and raising kids or helping parents, complete their degree. So we have a new initiative we'll be announcing. Stay tuned. That is really focused on that. Our goal is to save learners $1 billion in the cost of college by 2028. And so we're on track. We're at 475 million already through just folks taking courses on study.com that transfer and they graduated at partner institutions. So thrilled to talk about that and really address that as we look at what may be happening in the economy and knowing that folks may not have the same job security or feel the same security.
Yeah.
But it's a great time to go back and complete your degree or get your next degree. And there's an affordable way to do that.
Great point. Yeah. Connecting the dots with the affordability crisis around higher ed and what platforms like study.com can offer as more affordable pathways for folks to what they need. Amazing stuff here with Dana Bryson. Thank you so much for coming back and joining me on the show.
Thanks, Mike. Enjoyed it very much.
And for our listeners, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.